dedication, we generally have a moment of silence, and I would just ask that friends remember the families of Fred Brixby and Barbara Justice Perry, both of whom have died recently. Thank you. Jay Farrell, would you give us some pledge?
Everyone rise.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
You have your agenda before you. Are there any changes, either a motion to modify the agenda or to approve it as stated?
I have one, number 2, a couple of questions on number 2. I'd like to clear it out. I'd like to move it to, I guess, would that be an old business?
Yes, I think so. We'll move it to the first item under old business.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to that effect to amend the agenda, the consent agenda in that fashion? Jay Farrell?
So moved.
Second. Moved by Jay Farrell, seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. And I think we do need a motion to approve the balance of the agenda as modified by Jay Farrell's motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Jay Farrell, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries unanimously. I did make a few edits on the minutes of December 12th, by the way, and Alice and I consulted about that. It was nothing substantial. It was just typographical in nature. The next matter on the agenda is the proclamation, and I did take the liberty of substituting one resolution for a proclamation, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, let me read the proclamation celebrating and honoring the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Whereas Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. changed our nation forever through his leadership, service, and clarity of vision. And whereas in the brief time Dr. King walked upon the earth, he devoted his life to strengthening the content of the American character and called on our nation to live up to its founding principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all its citizens. And whereas through his determination, spirit, and resolve, Dr. King lifted souls and led one of the greatest movements for equality and freedom in history. And whereas the town of Pittsboro wishes to honor the lasting legacy of this great American, remembering the ideals for which he fought, and recommit ourselves to ensuring that our country's promise extends to all Americans across the great land. And whereas, as we observe Dr. King's birthday, the town of Pittsboro encourages all Americans to celebrate his memory by performing acts of kindness through service to others. Now, therefore, I, Cindy Perry, Mayor of Pittsboro, encourage all citizens of the town to honor Dr. King by living out his teachings as we continue to work for the day when dignity and humanity of every person will be respected. Adopted this the 23rd of January 2017, and this is a proclamation. Obviously, had we met on the original date of our first January meeting, it would have been timely, and but it's always timely to do that kind of thing. The proclamation that you had in your package with respect to Yoselin, the young woman in Siler City, I have drafted a possible resolution, given that a resolution carries more power than does a proclamation. The resolution, of course, would require the vote of and members of this body. And let me read the resolution. I fleshed it out a bit because I had the privilege of meeting this young woman on Saturday and learned a little bit more about her and her situation. Whereas due to the rising rates of violence and poverty, there has been an increase in children without parents traveling to the United States from Mexico and Latin American countries such as El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And whereas the safety of minors is a major concern for our town and county, and that certain protections have been put in place under DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, to protect minor and immigrant children. Whereas Yoselyn Herrera Palacios came to the United States as an unaccompanied and impoverished minor from El Salvador in 2014, and she's currently a junior at Jordan Matthews High School in Dollar City, North Carolina, where she is an honor student. Whereas on the 7th of June 2016, after her parents left for work, Yoselyn was preparing for school and was arrested by the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, leaving Yoselyn's 6-year-old sister alone in the house. And whereas her family was initially not able to find her in detention, and her family joined with advocates and classmates and members of the community to fight the initial deportation, Yoselyn is now scheduled to appear in federal immigration court in Charlotte, North Carolina on January 31st, 2017, where she will be seeking political asylum from the government turmoil and gang violence of El Salvador. Her deportation would essentially be a death sentence. Now, therefore, the Board of Commissioners and Mayor of the town of Pittsboro join their voices with the community to declare their opposition to the deportation of Yoselyn Herrera Palacios, and stands for the principle that minor children should not be removed from their homes by enforcement officials of ICE, especially without notice to parents. Let this resolution be conveyed to the court in Charlotte and wherever needed to demonstrate community support for Yoselyn Herrera Palacios and for the dignity of her and her family. In the format of a resolution, it would require the vote of the board. Is there discussion on the resolution?
I strongly support the resolution. I strongly support the language and would support our affirming this as a resolution if there is consensus.
Thank you. Would there be a motion then to that effect or further discussion?
Well, I initially was, my initial thought was as a block proclamation by the main side, because I did not have any knowledge of her situation or her story. But I did learn last evening firsthand from a very reputable member of this community who shared with me her story, and it does sound pretty tough. And so I am able to support the resolution. I do think I have a problem with one sentence that her deportation would essentially be a death sentence. I think that's a bit hyperbolic, because I have no way of knowing that. I don't know that to be true. I doubt it.
Would the body feel that it would be that sentence should be struck? Yeah. And I guess it's, like I said, the proclamation is wonderful and all of that. This does put a little bit more teeth in it, and the people who are in support of her in the community in Dollar City had asked that we forward whatever we do to them so that they could carry it to the court in Charlotte. So.
This is like when the health report has this proclamation, chances of the asylum and have county commissioners have that behind her.
Yeah. And they feel that it does help, especially from an elected body. So, And I think they're gathering support from ministers and friends and members of the NAACP have gotten very active in her defense, and I believe that she is relying on those people and her teachers at school.
I apologize for arriving late, and so it's possible that this was covered before my arrival, but I trust that you originated this text, or was it staff? And does this mirror in any way what has been expressed by the county commissioners?
I haven't seen the county commissioner's resolution. Alice Lloyd, did you see it?
She sent it to me. I didn't look at it because I already prepared that one. I didn't get it till late Friday evening.
But the county commissioners are also considering, or have
They have.
They have already.
passed
And so
a
has the
statement.
town of Siler City. And Alice and I did dual drafting once I had learned a little bit more about it.
Again, I support the text. I think it's a fine text. I will confess that I've been reticent in the past about local governments wading into immigration matters. But I feel like this is a community matter. And moreover, I would even support the broadening of the language for all youth. And I think there is some language in there about all minors.
Standing for the principle that minor children should not be removed from their homes, especially with young folks. Well, her mother is here, and then she remarried, the mother remarried and married a man of African American descent, and so the two of them are working together in the community to try to save her from.
Do they have citizenship?
I don't know about the mother.
She's married to someone who's
Yeah.
Oh, of course, he would be, yes, okay. Mhm.
So she's a 6-year-old baby born here, so she's just the only
She's
one
probably
member of the
different.
family, so she'd be separated from her family.
I agree also with John. You know, when a child comes involved, it's a little different story than it is with an adult. So go along with this.
Motion?
So moved.
Wilson Foley has moved. And Pamela Baldwin has seconded. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The regular meeting agenda next is, first is a public expression speaker, Randy Bowler. I believe you have signed up.
Good evening, Mayor Perry and the town board. It's good to see you back after a long hiatus. Let's hope we have no more snowstorms or other delays. I'm sure you're itching to get back going in 2017. Tonight has a special meeting for me and my family, since today would have been my father's 76th birthday and 67th year in America as a 14-year-old immigrant from Germany coming to America. So immigration matters resonate with our family as well. I'm here this evening to address two items, although I think this second item you guys have just addressed, and I handed you my thoughts before the meeting. The first item has to do with legislative goals. Today I had the pleasure this morning of seeing elected officials and staff from around the county meet with Representative Robert Reeves to discuss the proposed legislative agenda from Chatham County and its municipalities. As a side note, this was the first time I'd actually ever seen Golston there as well, so we had all three mayors at the meeting. Manager Grusbeck and Mayor Perry were there representing Pittsboro, and the meeting was quite well run and very informative. Last year, I suggested via email that the town of Pittsboro join Siler City and be added to the legislation that exempts certain municipalities from rules covering satellite annexations. Siler City did in fact become added last year, which allowed them to annex the megasite. I still believe that Pittsboro needs to be added to the list of exempt municipalities and should explore requesting this from our delegation. I think you're going to be having some upcoming meetings or times away from here where you're meeting and talking a retreat. Perhaps that would make a good item to discuss. In addition, the town may want to explore a local bill that would allow it to close the donut holes that exist within the town's current municipal limits by annexing these aforesaid properties. One good example is the donut hole at the end of East Cornwallis Street on the backside of Powderstone Village, while another is the odd pattern of in-the-town, out-of-town development that exists on Thompson Street east of Fire Tower Road. I only advise that because if you look at our town map, there's just a strange pattern of properties within the town that have never been annexed, and perhaps this would be another item that you'd want to discuss, maybe going to the delegation and using a local bill. The rest of my comments I'm going to submit. I submitted to you and I submitted to Clerk Lloyd. They just have to do with the resolution. Thank you very much for passing it. I think that that was a strong idea. I had talked to Mayor Perry offline, and I do agree, Commissioner Bonas, that these are difficult issues to weigh into, and before Chatham County or Siler City had made a move, I advised the mayor that she should wait and see, but once Siler City made a move with a bipartisan move, by the way. There were Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated voters there. Mayor Grimes was there in leadership. I think that this is a strong statement on behalf of the community, and I'm proud of you guys for passing it, because what's happening is quite gut-wrenching when you see someone being ripped from their family and sent home, and everyone else staying here who don't have issues with immigration. So I would just advise that you send a copy of this resolution to the town manager, the chairman, Mayor Grimes, and the manager of Siler City as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on our agenda are commissioner updates, and this is the time when we usually talk about meetings that we've attended. As Randy said, Ryan Grusbeck and I were at the legislative breakfast this morning, and we've got a retreat upcoming, which I think is something that we might want to take a moment and discuss. I myself attended a financial workshop which gave me just enough information that, coupled with the 3 accounting classes I took when I was in undergraduate school, have made me dangerous to Heather, our financial director. I think she is willing to take me on and help me out, but it's one of those things that you go to and you get wonderful information, and then you discover that it opens more questions than you have had before. But would the board like to take just a moment and talk about the retreat, since that may be an item under the manager's update?
It's actually not on the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Then let's just get that, and we'll take that strategic planning schedule where it belongs in its order. Anybody else have reports from committee meetings or other meetings that you've attended? Yes. We did a series of meetings with the master planning of the Parks and Rec group, and that was very interesting. They met individually with some of us, and then we did a session in the evening, which was sort of a wrap-up of some ideas. It's very much an ongoing process. The Parks master planning process will go through fall of this year. So if you have not been contacted and have some strong feelings about Parks planning, they will, I'm sure that Paul Horn will be glad to hear from you. Anything else? Climate change? Or
Nothing to report on climate change.
Nothing from Triangle J, but there was a joint meeting for the affordable housing, rental housing, and that was also the same day when the Park Recreation opened on Thursday or whatever. But that was very informative. Again, it is actually open to the public if anyone would like to attend. The next one will be in Pittsburgh, and that will be, I don't have my notes here with me, but I'll give it to Bruce that has all that information. But basically, it is open to the public, and we do discuss how things, sort of options or anything in reference to trying to locate or ideas about affordable rental housing at this moment. And then later on, it will go into hopefully affordable homes that you can purchase. It includes the town of Salt City, township for Chatham commissioners, Chatham County commissioners, and the individual that is he's the director, I think, of Senior Center over in Salt City. He is the person who is sort of chairing that particular organization, and it is very good information. And they don't just talk; they have actually real options that may be a possibility because they have met with the developers, and the developers have got some input, so then they brought that back to us. But it's very informative, and we hope to make some good ideas and suggestions about affordable rental housing, and later on affordable housing.
I can update folks on the PBA. I'm happy to say that Jeff Jones presented last Wednesday ideas about the UDO to the Pittsburgh Business Association, gave them updates on Chatham Park and other items, and everybody, I think, came away better educated. Jeff did a great job. I mean, everybody who's talked to me afterwards was spot on. Felt very confident that they could get answers if they had additional questions, so it was very good. Main Street Committee, the Design Committee, subcommittee of that group is meeting tomorrow morning to talk about locations for kiosks. So make a recommendation to this board as to where they think they should go. So probably be floating around downtown tomorrow about 9 a.m. Looking official. The 90% plans from Kinley Horn were submitted to NCDOT for the first 4 projects of downtown vision plan. Most folks, I think, associated with the circle, but there are actually 4 projects involved. And happy to report that working with Fred and his group doing the BMP in the northwest corner, I think all issues are resolved. The house coordinated with something, a durable design that, 1, will exist today before any improvements are made, and 2, will fit in if the additional improvements occur with the circle. The northeast corner still needs some additional coordination, so we're not quite all the way there with that northeast corner.
Speaking of that, I'm wondering, I think all of us have received just a copy of phone calls from people who are concerned about the narrowing of the courthouse circle. And one of the things I'm wondering is, have we gotten past the point of being able to have input to that? Or could we ask Kinley Horn to come and present to us their plans? And their engineer at one point had said that he would come and put cones around in the courthouse circle so that we could understand what the narrowing of the circle was going to do to the traffic flow. Not many people have expressed much confidence that the narrowing of the courthouse circle would help anything. But I think that we certainly need to have the information from the engineers before plans get too far down the line with DOT. Is that something that anybody's interested in, or is that something that PBA and Main Street could coordinate?
Well, I think the Main Street folks are trying to organize another meeting to discuss Main Street matters in February, and I'm not remembering the date. I think it's February 18th. I'm not positive about that. But I know that the PBA and the Main Street folks have put on a couple of meetings. I think both were at the Roadhouse, where Kinley Horn did come and the DOT came and presented and was receptive to comments. So I would imagine they would be equally able to do that again. They did take a lot of the information at the 65% submittal months ago and incorporated it into this 90% set. So it's clearly not 100% design, but 90%. So I think they'd be willing to do that. We can talk with Maria, who is heading the Main Street program, see if they can get Kim Lawrence folks and DOT folks there again. Unless you would prefer it to occur in this venue, but the reason they do it at the Roadhouse is it can accommodate more people. I think you have some.
There's a lot of people, even though it's been presented to the public multiple times,
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of people feel about it.
I know there's a lot of folks on the chat list focusing on parallel parking as if that's a done deal, which isn't even being discussed at this moment. And in the vision plan, it's one of maybe 4 or 5 options to be discussed, and I think it's legitimate to have it as an option. I mean, I don't support that. I don't want to lose the parking. But there are valid arguments for doing it, because you could then increase the width of the sidewalks. So it's worth looking at. On face value, I don't support it, but to exclude options when you're looking into these types of issues, I think is the wrong way to do it. So I think that's why it's in the downtown vision plan. But
I'll have to agree with you, because during the holidays, that was a hot topic at breakfast and lunch, was the deal with parallel parking. That's all everybody was concerned about. Less about the traffic circle than more about the parallel parking. So
I've heard more about that, but the circle piece has calmed down from what I hear.
Well, those of us that live on Hillsborough Street and watch the backups, it used to be that backups just occurred on Friday afternoons, but they're occurring daily now. And I don't know whether the board thinks it would be better to let Main Street host a meeting at the Roadhouse, or whether we get more distribution of understanding by having them as a part of our regular meeting at some point in February.
I'm open to either one, but it seems to me, I like the idea. I think it's possible for a lot of people.
I think of the last presentation, the 65% set, there were a lot of people there. And I think it was more of a free-flowing question and answer kind of thing. People felt they could easily just say, hey, Sal, tell me this, or CDOT, tell me this, or I challenge that assumption, or I challenge your thinking on that. So I thought it was pretty robust conversation.
It's more of a community meeting as
Yeah.
opposed to a presentation.
Yes.
Commissioner Fiocco, can you remind me of the date of that event? I'm wondering if that's the one that I attended.
Oh, gosh.
There were a few of them. The last one I remember included Mr. Royal and some discussion of the rain garden on one of the corners.
Yeah.
I think that was, but gosh, that was in the fall sometime.
Right.
I
So
can't
that
think
was
of it.
60%?
Yeah, I think it was below.
And again, I think it was well attended. The thing that was interesting to me is and I think there were some questions, but I mean, I've heard a lot more people talking after the meeting than I did during the meeting, which is kind of convoluted, and I don't know how to solve that one, because and I think as a board you have to decide whether or not, I mean, is the issue you want to learn more about it, or is the issue you just don't want to do it? And that's okay if you don't want to do it. You just need to be clear with your expectations with DOT on that. So
I don't think you all have ever expressed an opinion officially as a town board about the circle, period. And maybe you need to.
yeah, I think the vision plan did somewhat make a statement about the circle, but I don't know that anybody was really seeking the question of whether or not you wanted to do it or not.
Right.
I don't know whether, as a whole, I mean, you kind of approved the entire vision plan back in 2014, which included improvements to the circle, which were placed at the top of the list. And so DOT took that information and said, this is the project that we could probably accomplish much easier. It focuses on pedestrian movements, increases the amount of safety, and probably one of our most dangerous areas of town as far as traffic is concerned. And so from that standpoint, it would have the benefit of improving your downtown. And so everything kind of moved forward from there. Since then, we've heard a lot of people say, and this is what Perry is alluding to, I think, is since then we've heard a lot of people say, what do you mean? I can't understand. It's counterintuitive that you could decrease the size of the roadway at the circle and make it safer. And so that's what we've all kind of been struggling with. And there's always, I think, a natural blowback to traffic circles in general. I mean, I think we have hot and cold experiences with NCAs, the circle out by the library. You can't get a lukewarm opinion about the ones down towards Sanford. So it's just been kind of interesting. So I mean, I think that the process and additional public meetings is valid. But at some point in time, you got to really decide what you're really getting at here. I mean, if I hear Mayor Perry using language like she's using with regards to that, I mean at the best. I mean, you're using constructive language. That's not what I'm saying. I think at some point in time, you have to decide really what is it you're talking about as a group.
I'll express the concern that I think there's probably a fair amount of public misunderstanding and skepticism. And so for that reason alone, I think it might be helpful for us to formally or informally request that Sal present maybe a more elaborate articulation of how that engineering demonstrates that it will indeed be safer without impairment of flow. When I spoke to him about it, I asked that question. He convinced me, but to a certain extent, maybe I have more. I give more credibility to engineering types, and there's such an anti-establishment sentiment these days that maybe folks wouldn't give that much credence until they actually hear the reasons why it's.
It certainly makes it easier to cross the road as far as safety. It's a lot safer than pedestrian. There's something that would make it easier for pedestrians as far as safety.
I think from my experience, it is confusing at times because it's wider than one lane, and I sometimes wish that there was actual things to show us that there's 2 lanes and then we could get more throughput, but that's not the way it's built and not the way it's marked. So only 1 lane of traffic can flow through the thing anyway, so constraining that further, it makes sense to me that that's not going to impair flow. I suspect that there will be some dampening and slowing. That's the whole purpose. There will be longer backups, but I believe him when he cites his engineering and calculations that that will not be a very significant delay. I think he mentioned single-digit minutes, like 2 minutes added to the trip or something like that. I don't recall precisely, but I got the impression that it was not going to be a significant delay to a traveler going from, for example, north to south, 4:30 p.m. on a weekday.
The one thing I'm concerned about, to me, because the way the lanes are wider, if someone is turning, it's very easy to keep going and don't have to slow down because that person's slowing and you just pull on around them. And to me, that actually keeps the traffic flowing more. So I'm concerned about when it's more narrow, if we won't have that ability to pull around as people are turning, so it seems like it's going to slow down. And I wonder if it's going to make it more difficult if you're trying to get into the circle. It seems like traffic's going to be more over, so this is actually going to be harder to get into the circle. It seems to me it would, but although they've done traffic studies and they don't really think that that's going to get impact, but it seems to me it would. But I also like what they're planning to do with the spaces that's going to open up, the little mini parks along the circle would be really nice. I have good feelings about it.
Well, one of the features about narrowing the lanes is that it gives the person trying to enter the circle better visual cues as to what that oncoming car is doing, whether it's actually exiting the circle or coming around. Whereas now with the additional width, you can't really get the signal whether they're going to exit or keep coming around, and so why. So that's been one of the comments that Sal has expressed to me as to how it actually would increase efficiency, because you can readily get the queue and know that you can go, as opposed to sitting there and waiting while you left, I could have gone. So I think it's very complicated analysis and equation. And engineering is not always intuitive.
Am I hearing instead of a consensus building around having another meeting with the DOT engineers as well as Kimley Horn, and doing it in a big venue and encouraging people that we know who have called us and said, well, I just don't see how this is going to work, and encouraging those people to attend, maybe give it a bit more press than we've given the last one. And
One question, I think if we are opening it to discussion, it may give the impression that we're making changes to it, and I just think that's one thing that's important to decide, are we seeking input for potential change, or are we deciding that we need to consider when we announce a meeting about whether or not people will provide input?
Yeah, I would think they as indicated in my email, and I think as Commissioner Fiocco and others have mentioned, they anticipate, DOT and Kimley Horn anticipate additional public hearings on this, 90% and 100%. So I would think before you ultimately, if you come to the point of making a decision, if there's a decision to be made on this, that I would recommend you hear out public hearings, you go through the public hearing process and get comments and things of that nature, and at least hear from the people before you ultimately make a decision on it.
So maybe the meeting could be associated with the public hearing, that there would be an information session prior to public hearing, so maybe we need to do both. We need to be combined.
Now we can put that meeting here.
I think it would be very important, because a lot of people, just as you said, they are not convinced that narrowing that traffic circle is going to help at all. I heard it from the beginning that it's going to hinder traffic, and somebody even asked, hey, why are you all doing these at circles? I'm not doing that good circle, that's just safe. But basically, I think we need to know specifically what time did you do this traffic study? Tell us exactly what you looked at when you did this traffic study. There are a lot of trucks which go around that circle, and I mean, it can back up. I've seen it back up. I've been in it when it backs up. I want to know a little bit more, just like the public. They want to know this from DOT, what they're basing that on. Because I've seen some things that DOT has done, and they may have engineers, which is given their expertise, but a lot of times it doesn't flow the way they think. You can visualize certain things, and you can say that, okay, this is how it should go. But in reality, a lot of times it just doesn't work that way. So I would definitely be interested in hearing specifically what times they did those traffic studies, and then the public, let them know what their concerns are. I would love to hear more of their concerns, because I've heard them before, as I said, from the very beginning. That's what it's always been. Just leave the traffic circle alone. That's what they say, leave it alone. So I think they need to hear why they want to do it, what the benefits would be, and answer their questions as to what's going to happen with these large trucks that go around that circle, and how they're going to accommodate that. So I think
Well, that's just the southwest corner. That's where it's pretty sharp. Entering from the west and heading south is where it's sharp. From the acute angle into the circle.
I think people would, it'd be nice if people could hear about the parks that are, the new parking, how the parking lot's going to be redesigned, and things like that. I think people would be interested in knowing how that new parking looks like.
so can we combine a citizen information session with a public hearing in a, I mean, you want to see the cones and the actual on-the-ground discussion during the daylight hours, obviously, and maybe follow it by having a public hearing that evening? so that people could come and look and view and then come and make comments. I did attend one of the Roadhouse meetings, and I was a little bit surprised that there weren't more questions. But, and then again, maybe they were very satisfied with the explanation from the engineers. I'm not sure why we didn't seem to have quite as many questions.
It was puzzling to me that we didn't have questions.
What's the pleasure of the board?
Commissioner Fiocco, can you request through the PBA that DOT meet with us, or is it within our purview to, as board of commissioners, to make that request?
It's really within the town's purview to ask them to do that.
Okay.
I mean, Main Street program has made those requests in the past. We can do it again. We'll go through Ryan, nation of request. You know, I think Sal did suggest that doing simulations with the cones is a possibility.
Good.
I know they do simulations with software. It shows the paths through and around. We could do that presentation as well.
Maybe that would be enough.
I mean, you've got to, again, trust the software that is telling you that it's real. It's modeling reality. But, you know, engineers use it all day, every day to simulate their designs, test their designs. So I think we could definitely ask anyone in NCDOT to either have a public information meeting, which could be a more open, interactive discussion, as opposed to a public hearing where I think we're going to limit people's time, being very formal about it. But we can do both. Maybe that's a good idea, because have an information session and then have a public hearing following that, whether it be the same day, which is probably a lot to ask for, or just as a subsequent meeting.
Just trying to think of how to keep them from having to duplicate what they've already done.
Yeah.
And also, sometimes when I did have codes, and I'm a very busy person, I like to see it, but when you think about it, that's going to be a lot of work for them to do that. They're going to have to do all these measurements, because it's so full of
What if we were to leave it to Brian Grusbeck to be able to schedule all of that coming forward? Is that a practical solution to that?
Yeah. Call Sal and see what's possible.
That's
good.
Okay. Excellent. Then let's move then to old business. We have removed item number 2 from our consent agenda, the resolution to execute promissory note for the sanitary sewer I&I project. And we pulled that. Who do we need to hear from?
I had one question regarding that. I saw right here that the contract was to Herring and Rivenbark, but I was under understanding that Hydrostructure was doing this project.
So Hydro is the project engineer and designer. The Rivenbark is the company doing the actual work. Contractors doing the actual pipeline.
They're not able to do this?
No, they're not. They don't pipeline. They hire contractors to do the work. Yep.
That must have been my misunderstanding, because I was assuming that they were pretty much handling the contract work and all.
Yeah, they're handling the contract. They're the project
They
manager.
will be overseeing the project?
They are currently overseeing the entire project.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's all I got. Thank you.
Sure.
Next item under old business is the Chatham Transitional Element Small Area Plan update. Sorry.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Now we can go to Chatham Park additional elements with Jeff Jones leading us in receiving information and providing direction.
Mayor and members of the board, wanted to give you a quick update on the committee for Chatham Park on the additional elements and have a little bit of discussion as to where they're at, where Chatham Park is, your thoughts on moving forward with the first set of elements. If we remember a couple of meetings back, Chatham Park Additional Elements Committee, they gave you all their recommendations. Chatham Park took those recommendations that they received from the committee, from what they heard at the public hearing, what they heard from staff, and they formulated responses to those comments, and you received those in your packet. The plan of action right now is for these responses to comments is to go to the planning board for formal recommendation. That could be as early as February for the planning board to give their recommendation to you all, and then on to back to you for some sort of official action, whether it's to adopt it or have additional comments, but that would be sort of the path that was set whenever we develop the schedule for the committee and how they're going to do these sets of 4 elements. I do have a question for the board if there was any desire for these responses to go back before the committee and for you all to have the committee further respond to Chatham Park. That's something that you all could discuss. That would alter the schedule a little bit, because then we would not be going, most likely not to February planning board, it would be some other time. I can tell you that the second set of elements was wrapped up earlier this month, and on Wednesday we will start the final set of elements in front of the committee. So the committee is still doing work, hearing new information, and considering new elements as we move forward. We're kind of getting into a little log jam as to responses from Chatham County and what you all desire for those responses to go through a process. Is it as discussed through planning board initially and then back to you, or do you want to have this interim where you go back to the committee and back to potentially Chatham Park, and then finally on to the planning board for official recommendations? So those are things that's on the table for you all to kind of get some direction to staff.
Well, I think it's probably worthy of discussion by the board. 2 things that I noted from your memo, Jeff, and thank you very much for that explanation. I would be eager to hear the Additional Elements Review Committee's thoughts on the responses from Chatham Park. I'm not sure about that level, that layer of the review committee responding to Chatham Park, or whether or not it would be satisfactory to have the review committee give their response to us. I'd like to see us discuss that perhaps. But the second item was that I think that I'm aware of comments that were submitted in writing that were not responded to, public comments, and I think that it would be very good for those public comments to also be addressed in future, if not for this last round of additional elements.
I have tried to go to a number of these meetings. I've missed a couple on the way, but by my way of thinking, they're coming up on the hardest phase yet, which is public facilities, public art, transit, and affordable housing. And I I guess my initial inclination is to let them go on and deal with those because they're such heavy topics. And I didn't know if they had asked for or whether they were going to receive consultants on any of those topics.
On these next particular elements, Manager Brisbane and I are actively considering that, especially for affordable housing.
Well, I guess you could look at it one of two ways, that either it'd be a good time to go sort of regroup and look at the comments and go back before we plunge them into the deep end of the pool here on these last 3, 4. How does the board feel?
Well, I think the committee has done what we've asked of them, and I don't think we asked them to respond to responses to their recommendations. I think that's really going to be left up to us.
It could be a real ongoing process.
Yeah, and I think it will be, and I think they've done their part, which I think they've done a pretty good job. You know, I'll say that some of the responses are more satisfactory and some of them are perhaps lacking. I think through the process we will have additional requests or comments for the applicant and discussions with the applicant. But I think we're getting off schedule, and the schedule really is important to obviously the applicant because they want to keep things moving forward. So I think they've fulfilled their mission with these first 3. It sounds like they've finished with the second 3 and coming up with probably the most difficult. And so I'm satisfied with what they've done, and I don't think we need to charge them with additional work.
How about if we, and maybe once we have, they put invest a lot of time in coming up with these recommendations, and they might welcome the opportunity to reply to some of these things. So what if we shared this with them, and if they'd like to submit comments, then we would, be interested to hear that has comments, but not to change the schedule because of it, but just to offer that to them if you'd like to make comments on this.
I think so. So not formally tasking them, but expressing a willingness to hear from them if they
so desire.
volunteer responses to the responses.
Right, if they so desire to follow up with these recommendations, if they have additional comments. I personally would like to hear if they do have things that they want to hear, but not to comment on that.
Jeff Jones, do you anticipate that it's going to take longer than these 4 meetings to be able to approach the last of the elements?
Quite possibly with these last 4. That's why they were left towards the end, because they could drag on a little bit, and it could be that 1 or 2 or however many elements need further discussion outside of 2 meetings that the committee has designated for discussion. So it could be that this affordable housing is kind of pulled out, and that one is kind of on its own track a little bit.
So, Jeff, how would we handle the outstanding matter of public comments that weren't addressed?
I think that's going to be part of your comments to the applicant.
Very good.
I anticipate the plan board making some comments on that. They haven't addressed all these. And also think that you all will have that as well.
Thank you.
So am I hearing from the board that they favor going forward with the group 3 meeting dates?
I'll have to excuse myself. I'm not feeling very well, sorry.
I knew it was not feeling well. And but do I hear a consensus that we allow the committee to hear the responses and reply on an independent basis, and that to whatever extent that we can, perhaps assist in this last group, especially if there's a coordination point between the committee, the county committee on affordable housing. I don't know about 25th March, there's going to be anything ready for sharing. But,
If I could, on that front, when the county had put together the proposal on affordable housing with Triangle J, I also asked them to include a bid to review the affordable housing. And as Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin can attest, I think the planners that are involved with Triangle J have a pretty good handle of, not only Chatham County, but provides some comparative insight to what.
Wonderful.
And I've talked to Jeff a little bit about this, and I probably want to flesh it out for about 5 more minutes before we go ahead with it, but my suggestion would be to engage in another conversation with Triangle J and see if we can sort of, involve that proposal with our initial office discussion.
Okay.
So I think they could probably give us a pretty balanced, fair oversight of what the lay of the land is as far as this issue goes, and help us maybe a little bit with what we can do moving forward. And Chatham Park is as Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin can attest, Chatham Park's been a decent part of the discussion so far with that group, so it's probably a good time to get them engaged with a little bit of focus on what we're going through right now.
They'll be making the presentation, will they not, January the 25th?
Yeah, the information I included, all of the meeting information from the last meeting in your packet, the FYI. So there's a timeline there on the cover page. I can go over that a little bit when I wrap things up with my report. But yeah, their finalized plan will be July 25th. So as far as the county is concerned, so there's no reason why we couldn't begin the discussion for our element here earlier than that.
Well, in consideration of the fact that he's not feeling well, could we agree that we would go forward with the schedule as it is, share the comments with the committee, and continue our own selves to recognize the ideas that individuals are putting forward.
Excuse me,
Please. Yeah, the longer he stood at the podium,
More pale he looked.
the more pale he looked. And
I feel better.
We're going to have another medical emergency. So that we would go forward recognizing that all comments that we would receive would be considered as well. Okay.
Would this also include any consultants that we plan on using? You just talking about using the Triangle J?
Well, I think this would be the first natural one. I mean, we can evaluate the others here in a little bit, but as Mr. Jones mentioned, it's this is kind of going to have a life of its own. It's going to be on its own track. I would suggest we engage Triangle J with the affordable housing one, or at least let me begin the talks on engaging them here as soon as we possibly can, if you guys are willing. Like I said, they were vetted already. The county process already kind of vetted that before this, if it was a fit. I didn't know at the time if it was going to be a good fit or not. It was kind of left us some flexibility for direction.
Mr. Grusbeck, I think I'm hearing you say that your hope, perhaps expectation, is that possibly Triangle J in their analysis their schedule for that work may fit with the schedule for the additional elements review committee?
That's a very good observation. I think the scheduling is going to be first and foremost. That would be the question that I would have to ask them. I can ask that question. They're aware of this. They're aware of this. I think they've kept their ears to the tracks on it. So I don't think the learning curve would be all that great. It would be a matter of making sure that the timing of it would fit with ours.
So I would also be concerned or curious about the scope of their analysis and whether or not that would be similarly limited as the committee has chosen to limit themselves just to affordable rental, or if we would be hearing from them their perspectives and/or their recommendations for what I view as a great diversity of different affordable housing needs, i.e. affordable rentals, affordable subsidized housing, affordable workforce housing for purchase in the price range that seems to be missing from town, as well perhaps as, I don't know, some recommendations about what to do about existing housing, substandard housing, emergency housing. Yeah.
Well, I think the idea, I mean, that literally the scope, or any discussion of scope such as it was to this point, has been on reviewing additional elements with regard to the Chatham Park PDD additional elements with regard to affordable housing. It wasn't necessarily to create an affordable housing program for Greater Pittsboro. I think that has to be noted. So I got to nuance your question about scope a little bit. I can say that I would not want to limit it to just, say, a discussion of rental housing, for example. So it would be a review of, okay, what is being proposed for affordable housing within the Chatham Park additional elements PD, and then how would that conform with what our expectations, what our wants are? Because you can't. I mean, at the end of the day, you guys are going to have to make tough decisions on what exactly this is. We can't. I think to a certain extent we can't rely on Chatham Park or any other developer to define what affordable housing is for the community. That's exactly what Chatham Park is going to tell you. That we shouldn't be the ones to do that. It's going to be Pittsboro that has to do that. And so what this group would scope with, unless I hear other additional elements, update how we might be able to react to that, what we might be able to provide to it. I don't know that we're in a position yet to really define what we want to do as a community. Maybe we are if we get into this a little bit. That's not really the task at hand just yet.
Thank you for that clarification. I will share with the board that much reflection and some personal experience over the holidays, and I guess sometimes New Year's we think about resolutions. I am personally feeling a much greater sense of urgency about affordable housing in our community and about how bad things are. And so I've spoken with Mayor about this, and I've done some research, and I would like to start a conversation among fellow commissioners about the possibility of us drafting perhaps a resolution that may try and encapsulate our sentiment at this moment in time, our concerns, perhaps a problem statement with some firm data behind it, and then perhaps kind of a vision for what we would like to see in affordable housing in our community. I'm thinking that maybe that might inform the work on our Unified Development Ordinance. That's kind of my hope, because I really am feeling a sense of urgency after some experiences in the community.
Well, on the topic of affordable housing, and mentioning it was envisioned and it is discussed how Chatham Park's master plan and additional elements would inform the UDO and vice versa. And it was my hope, it is my hope, that Chatham Park would design a program in such a way that we would embrace it for the entire community. And so that's my hope. I'll admit I don't know that the additional element as it exists today meets my expectations for a really robust affordable housing feature to the economy of Pittsboro. So I'm open to trying to define from the town perspective what it is we want and it's important and would embrace for Town Park and for the town as a whole. And I know that Robert Dowling is a great asset. I think he is consulting with the Town Park folks. And so I think there are resources available, and Triangle J sounds like they could probably be a real good help too, because I think they've got a pretty broad spectrum of information and models.
I think Brian alluded to this a little while ago, but I'm not sure that we should rely upon Chatham Park to create that kind of blueprint for affordable housing. Maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but I think we need to lead the way and say, here's what we think, and here's how we want to solve the problem. And not rely on Chatham Park to be the solution to a problem which has existed long before Chatham Park arrived on the scene. I mean, we've got to take our own responsibility for blighted and under housing which is substandard. And to me, the way to get a robust program is to just immerse ourselves in it and use it, for example, as a if a priority, if the board saw it as a priority, think that about making it a really central part of the retreat. That here's our vision, here's how do we go about solving the problem. And I don't mean setting up another study committee with due respect to the committee that you're serving on, because obviously we need to understand what the alternatives are. But I feel like that it's time we took more action than we have.
It was not my intent to suggest that we were relying on Chatham Park to write a program. What I was suggesting was that in their obligation to create a program, that it would be so satisfactory to the town to say, that's it, that's what we want. Or a model. A model. Right.
Well, let me just say this about the affordable housing. A lot of times, oftentimes people associate affordable housing with poverty levels. And it's not necessarily associated with that at all. It's just a matter of people being able to purchase homes in an affordable manner. People can work every day as teachers, police officers, in town hall, and still can't find anywhere in Pittsburgh to live. That's what I'm talking about with the affordable housing. And this housing task force that you were talking about, they do look at what you were saying, the workforce. They've looked at that, and this right now is just specifically looking at rental homes and how there can be affordable rental units at this point. But later on, it's going to go to that next level. But they are looking at homes which may be abandoned within Chatham County, where there are air properties, which there are homes on air properties, and different things like that. We're just looking at outside the box. It's a lot. But there can be things which people could use. There could be air property, as I said, with a home on that air property, and then they may be able to get that as rental units or so forth and so on. But it's just to give you an example. But again, what I'm thinking about when I say affordable housing, I'm not just talking about people at a level, at a poverty level. I'm talking about people that work every day. And yes, a range. And as I said before, I think Powell Place is an excellent example because they have the condos, which are affordable. They have the homes, the cottages, which are affordable. Then it goes up to the next level. And I just think that's just an excellent example. I really, really do.
I think the one problem is sometimes people just think smaller house, that is affordable, that's enough. But sometimes you have large families, like a large family would not fit in a townhouse like that, and yet they need sometimes something bigger than a townhouse. And so I think that's the tricky part too, is making sure you have to have larger places for families that are also affordable. It's not just about a big house.
Right. But I do think that that is a good model, in my opinion. That's a good model. And there are other cities, as I said in the meeting on Thursday when I was there are other cities which have homes which are affordable. You can go to those other cities. There are other developers that build all the time in these cities. And people which have just graduated college should have the opportunity to go and purchase a home. Not just purchase, find somewhere to rent, but they can actually purchase a smaller home. And then later on, graduate up to another. That's what I mean in reference to affordable.
Starland has rentals right there too.
Yes.
And I like the way it's integrated. I mean, I think people are worried about the apartments coming in the community, but it's really different. I mean, it's like they're integrated.
It's just a great, and that's just my opinion. I think it's a great example. I think it's a great example.
Mayor Perry, I'd like to echo your suggestion that we put this on the agenda for the retreat. I think it'd be a very fruitful topic for us to dive into and maybe try to tease out our heartfelt sentiments as representatives of the public. Not try and get any deeper than the weeds of actual policies, but I would hope that we could begin to sketch out what this board, the consensus from this board. Yeah.
Randy Buller?
Mayor Perry, I'd just like to offer, in the 6 years I was on the Affordable Housing Task Force representing this board, we came to conclude that we want to call it affordable living, and perhaps you would be thinking about this as a retreat because the housing component goes in with the energy component, which also goes into transportation component and the availability of jobs. So if you can walk to jobs or have availability of transportation and these houses are built with energy efficiency in mind, then people can afford to live here. And you saw where Habitat, I know Beth used to work for Habitat, went that direction, and now people can afford to stay in the houses, John, because they have a good energy envelope. And so I think that when we think of it, exactly. So we came to that conclusion after studying this that we had to think of those other components, and of course, obviously access to food, but it was no good for us to put housing to support Habitat or empowerment or other developments if people didn't have access to jobs and transportation. Thank you for
I agree.
that.
And there are other things that maybe we may want to reflect on, other complexities, and I don't know what the jargon is in affordable housing policy, but former Mayor Buller, I would like to credit you for what you accomplished in Chatham Forest. My understanding is that we have affordable rentals, subsidized rentals in our neighborhood, and it creates a diversity without adversity. It creates a diversity that I think enriches the entire neighborhood, and it makes me feel good, warms the cockles in my heart, and also we've got good neighbors. So mixing different housing types is a topic perhaps we can explore.
Well, then let us direct that when, I don't know if we need a motion for this or not, that when we do our retreat that we will zero in on the affordable housing and the ancillary issues.
Let's have that conversation.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
The next item under old business is wastewater treatment and capacity preservation contract. Ryan and Coleman.
Well, I'll get it started, and then I think some of the granular stuff in the agreement can be answered by Mr. Messick. And then we also have with us this evening Carl Sharp from the Wooten Company. And Ted Cole is back there somewhere, if he can still hear couldn't hear me. I didn't mean if you can still hear me, but if you can hear me. To answer any questions about if there are any financing issues or if there are any technical issues that come up with this. So what we're talking about tonight is only an agreement with the City of Sanford, or a contract with the City of Sanford to supply them with wastewater treatment. We're not talking about an NPDES permit. We're not talking about a reclamation facility on Eubanks Road. At least as far as a decision point, we're not talking about any of those things. We're talking about an agreement that we've been talking about for a number of years now, most specifically since about 2015, when the previous iteration of the board requested that we begin conversation with the City of Sanford. So you recall before the holidays, we talked about the agreement and ultimately came up with four or five points of discussion, and empowered Mr. Messick to engage his counterpart, the Sanford City Attorney, and we had, I think, one subsequent meeting with staff, with the City of Sanford staff after that. I think currently Commissioner Fiocco had also supplied some questions and comments. I think he had emailed those to us a couple of times. I know Mr. Messick and I have been back and forth with Commissioner Fiocco at least once or twice today. So those items can be clarified too if we need to. But as you can see in the memo and then up on the board, the five items that we kind of left with are there. And I think and Mr. Messick can go into more detail here. But what we have, at least with each of these issues, is either an agreement or some additional language which spells out agreement between the two parties, or excuse me, at least as far as Sanford is concerned, not necessarily with you guys at this point. Sanford City Council met on January 10th and approved the version that you have attached. That version obviously isn't finalized unless you were to agree to it. You should also note as well that there are some conditions precedent with the agreement that would require require final approval on the loan and the LGC, and would also depend on loan closing. Now, final approval by the LGC would be made a couple of different conditions, one of which would be a copy of this agreement. They would want to see and review a copy of this agreement. And second, the LGC would want to see any agreement that we come up with Chatham Park with regards to their guarantee of the debt that would be incurred with revolving funds, and also to any debt that would be guaranteed on both fronts. Any debt that would be guaranteed towards the revolving fund, and any debt that we would be paying off as far as the capacity fee. And so that would be a condition precedent as well, even if you were to approve this agreement. So I guess with that, I would ask Mr. Messick if he has any comments about this particular portion. We also have some discussion. I think there was a concern about possible, I guess, lack of a better put a risk involved, not necessarily going in this direction with the City of Sanford. And I've provided some thoughts on that as well. And then also in your packet you have some updated financial information from Davenport and Company that also includes the Chatham Park participation in the project, and gives some parameters for what kind of ultimate effect that this would have on the town, and to a certain extent the cost of actually delivering this service to sewer customers. And an overview of that can be provided by Mr. Cole as well. So, Mr. Messick, I don't know if you have any additional comments.
No, I think the manager has summarized the changes that we had talked about previously with respect to the previous iteration of this This version is also a little bit shorter, a little bit simpler, and I think it, as Mr. Grusbeck indicated, Sanford has approved this. The blank on Exhibit C, which is the trigger in determining the capacity charge, it's the earlier of the three items that are listed there. One is the closing of the Clean Water Revolving Fund loan, whenever that happens to be, or if there happens to be a lack of approval from the LGC, then some kind of alternative financing, if that would an option that would be in place. Or three is some definite date, which would be the town's best estimate of when either of those things might happen. At any rate, that's the only to be determined figure, I think, in here. And if you all had an opportunity to look at it, if you have any questions. I know Mr. Fiocco had comments on the previous version, and he had some requests for comments about how this addressed some of those other concerns, and I tried to send those out to you all this morning, and hopefully that was helpful. On the pretreatment things, the issues, I mean, both the town of Pittsburgh and the town of Sanford have sewer use ordinances that deal with pretreatment, require pretreatment for significant industrial users, and go into a great deal of detail about what is required for that. This agreement just incorporates those sewer use ordinance provisions, and Sanford wants to make sure that discharges into the Pittsburgh system that eventually end up in Sanford are not going to upset their system and violate the standards that are in place. And those standards were promulgated by the federal government and also local standards, and they deal with heavy metals and things of that sort. But if you want to have any specific questions about any portions of this, I'll try to answer them. Sanford's looked at it pretty hard, and they seem to be satisfied.
Past week, I had an opportunity to speak to someone from the Burlington Town Council, and they indicated that they've spent a huge amount in pretreatment. Now, granted, they're a great deal more industrial than we are here, but do we have any idea about what costs the pretreatment language in here would require?
Well, it's the user who has to pay for the pretreatment. It's not the town.
So it would be the industry.
Right.
Okay.
And of course, we have no such users at this point.
I mean, to be fair, we would have, excuse me, to be fair, we would have some costs that we would have to incur as far as, as far as annual certifications for it. We're talking about hundreds of dollars initially, from a staff perspective. There would be some costs that we would incur for it.
Well, I engaged, I had a laundry list of comments, and Mr. Messick and Mr. Grusbeck have answered them well and allayed my concerns. I do have two things that I'm still interested in discussing, and Mr. Grusbeck just mentioned the pretreatment responsibility is on the applicant, the operator, the owner of a facility that by state statute would require, or state rule would require a pretreatment program. Our sewer use ordinance provides the same. Sanford provides the same. But in this contract, it talks about the process by which a user would obtain a permit to begin operation. And the example that Mr. Messick provided was that Sanford's ordinance says you make an application, they've got 30 days to say, yes, we've received your application and it's complete, or it's incomplete. I don't know what happens if it's incomplete, but I'm assuming the applicant resubmits and there's another 30-day period. At the end of the day, once it is deemed complete, then Sanford has 90 days to issue permit.
Same provision as in Pittsburgh's ordinance, so Pittsburgh would have 90 days after the 30 days.
So, an applicant, if these processes were serial, Pittsburgh does their thing for 120 days. Sanford does their thing for 120 days. An applicant's got 240 days, and I'm sure it's business days, so that's a long time to get a single permit. And my request was to somehow put a limit on how long Sanford has to review it, because they're relying on us to institute a program here in town that meets their standards. So I don't think that we should subject a citizen, a business owner, to that additional review time, if possible. And my suggestion was to put a limit in this contract. And Mr. Messick's not sure that that's the way to do it, but in fact to change the sewer use ordinance. But here we are, Pittsburgh saying, hey, Sanford, change your sewer use ordinance. I don't know that would work, but I would like, if we can, through this agreement, to help our citizens be efficient in obtaining permits. And by efficient, I mean not subjecting them to inappropriate delays or unimportant delays. So that's something I'd like if we can work that in here. I'd like to do that. The other item is that this contract allows Pittsburgh to deliver 2 million gallons a day of raw sewage to Sanford. There's a caveat that says if Sanford makes a contract with Pittsburgh to send reuse water back to Pittsburgh, that for every gallon that comes back, we can add another gallon of raw sewage to the treatment train without additional cost. And I would like for us, because we're going to have a pipeline that's 16, 17 miles long, there are going to be ample opportunities for another party, maybe the county, maybe a developer, to tie on to that line. And if that organization has a contract with Sanford to receive reuse water, then I would like the infrastructure we're building to have the ability to send that additional gallon as well. And so my recommendation was not only to limit it, I think it's on page 3, to modify the language to say something to the effect that any entity who is actually using the infrastructure that we're proposed to build to deliver sewer to Sanford, they have a contract to get reuse water back from Sanford. That the same equation occurs for that entity as well, and Pittsburgh can therefore send more than 2 million gallons a day.
Not to argue with you, and the engineers are here, but I don't think you can run reuse in the same line that you're sending sewer.
No, I'm not suggesting that it's in the same line.
But it's not going to be. This project is for the sewer line.
But how is Pittsburgh going to get the reuse water from Sanford? Not in the same pipe. No. So
be a separate project.
Exactly. And so if there's another entity that contracts with Sanford to build that infrastructure, if that entity is using our sewer infrastructure to send it to Sanford, raw sewage, has an agreement with Sanford to get reuse water back via some other infrastructure.
I can't imagine why you would, between the 17 miles between here and there, you're going to allow somebody to tap into your sewer portion.
I can think of many reasons to do that.
Why would you want to?
Because we might want, because
if they're not in part of
town
town,
to do so. It might be in our interest to have economic development or via access to that pipeline.
Town boundaries are already planned to extend far to the south.
You have demand far in excess of 2 million gallons, and you're going to tack on other users than what you've projected here?
I think some of that demand is what I'm referring to in the south.
Okay. But there's never been a development plan in the south beyond Turkey Creek that I'm aware of.
I don't know what the future holds, but I do think it's a good option to have.
Well, why shouldn't it be listed to Pittsburgh? Why should Pittsburgh allow a private developer to pump reuse water back up the road at all?
Sanford's doing the pumping.
Okay.
So when we originally had this discussion, I said, hey, can we include Chatham County in that equation? And then, of course, the more I thought about it, I said, well, I don't think we need to definitely define it as Chatham County.
Right. We don't have to define who the third party is.
Right.
But they get charged with these coming in our minds.
Well, I don't think there's any, well, maybe so. Maybe so. Maybe there are parties who may disagree.
Yeah, if we're told it's all this.
But if you're not getting the benefit of the reuse water, why would you even entertain the proposition? If the reuse is going to a third party.
Additional capacity for discharge to Sanford without cost.
So if
All our
anybody,
reuse water was gonna be coming out of our own plant.
I'm not even talking about that. Has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, this project doesn't contemplate a reuse pipe coming back at all. That would have to be some other level of planning and discussion and who's paying for it. And, I mean, there's so many steps that we have to get to before we'd even reach this scenario.
Correct. However,
Outside of the scope of this agreement.
but to say this agreement doesn't contemplate that, I don't think it's true, because it says in here that if Pittsburgh receives reuse water from Sanford, then you can increase the amount of effluent going to Sanford. So it contemplates the idea. I'm trying to avoid limiting it to just Pittsburgh.
I like the idea of greater flexibility. And I think that's something important. I appreciate you advocating for it. It brings to mind other questions that I've had about this. And Mr. Rusbeck, I appreciate your addressing some risks of a scenario that involves doing nothing. But my questions about risks, I think, had everything to do with the project. I think I may have even described a meteoroid or asteroid hitting the line. You know, what are our downside risks with this project? What are the possible scenarios of things going wrong? That's what I'd very much like to learn more about.
If we could, Mr. Sharp, pardon, I'm sorry. Could you talk about maybe some of the risks of, and I'm not being facetious, of a meteoroid or an asteroid possibly hitting our line, and what would be involved?
I don't think there can be any way to estimate that risk at all.
Yeah.
It's so infinitesimal.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. What I have requested, I don't know if anybody else cares to hear this, but I would like these risks analyzed in writing. And I think that it's important that we, before we embark upon a very significant capital project, the contracts that upon which that project pivots, we need to understand those risks. And
okay, so I need to understand the question then exactly. What risk are you contemplating? Physical, technical?
So, at some point in time, I believe that this project will be the bulk of our sewer treatment capacity. And I know so little about municipal infrastructure that I would like to lean upon you and your expertise to understand and articulate to us what are the risks. What could go wrong with it?
With the pipeline?
Yeah, I don't want to try to begin to imagine those. That's what I would like to ask you to do.
Okay. Well, we have the designer of the project here. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about some of these issues.
Well, as we go through the project, I mean, we design for a specific flow, and we design for a specific length of the pipe. And that's what our design is based on. So at this point, we would design for a 2 MGD flow to Sanford with a peak of 3 MGD. And that's based on the IBT limitations that allow it to go to that point.
IBT means interbasin
Interbasin transfer. And until you can get a higher degree allowed from an interbasin transfer application approval, which is about a 3-year process, you really can't go beyond the 2 million gallons a day we're talking about. They allow a peak of 3 million gallons a day, so there's a peak factor in there too, but on an average daily basis, you could do 2 million gallons per day to Sanford. So I don't know if that's considered a risk, but that's a limitation, I guess you could say. As we design the pipeline, we'll have portions of the pipeline. I mean, we look at pressures as we go along. So we'll take into account all the pressures when we design the pipeline to prevent any kind of bursts, if you're worried about, that kind of a thing. In terms of when you design one of these pipelines, you also look at air entrained in the pipeline, and we will be doing detailed design on that to allow that air to be evacuated out of the pipeline to keep the pressures down. So in terms of a risk of a rupture, it's very little potential for that. Like I said, we do have a limit. We have a set design volume, so you can't go above that volume. So that's one thing to address on potentially getting other people to go into the pipeline downstream of where you are now. You're really limited on your volume now by this interbasin transfer. So that's something just to take into consideration as you were talking about that last item. We would be designing to add a chemical for odor control as well within the pipeline and at the far end of the pipeline. Right now you have domestic waste where we've got data on what those contaminants, what the levels of the waste is right now. And right now we don't see any violations occurring going to Sanford. In terms of these SWU ordinances, I mean, that might be a risk on your part. In terms of if you're looking at a risk, what pretreatment might you have, but we've looked at those numbers and you have basically normal domestic wastewater. So Sanford should not have any trouble receiving that wastewater if you want to look at that as a risk, I guess. I personally can't think of, if we have a power failure, we're going to have an emergency generator on the pump station. So that's accounted for within the design, is if there's a power failure in the town, you're going to have an emergency generator on site to pump your wastewater to Sanford. On the Sanford side, we plan to go to the equalization basin, so they also will have an emergency generator on their wastewater treatment plant. They are required by law to have emergency generation on their wastewater treatment plant. So they're going to have a certain amount of treatment they have to be able to do in a power failure. So that kind of covers that risk of not being able to discharge to them. Because their power plant's down, they're supposed to have their power plant have the ability to run in an emergency in that way. So as far as I can see, those are the risks that I see and how they're addressed. I'm not sure what other risks you're thinking about. The pipeline is going to be underground virtually the whole way. We're taking into consideration at the Deep River a future project that DOT is going to do there. We've already gotten plans and ideas from them on what space they need to do the bridge work down there. And we're going to put our pipeline around that so that when they do that construction later at that point, there shouldn't be a risk of the pipeline being disturbed by a future bridge replacement at the Deep River. So we've taken, we've looked at all these different aspects, and those are, what I would consider a risk too. We're minimizing the risk of that. So I'm not sure, from an engineering standpoint, I'm really not sure what risks, we don't look at, catastrophic risks in terms of an asteroid hitting something or, of that sort. We'll have, the pipeline will have embedding, it'll have its proper bedding, and other things according to engineering standards. We'll also be, as we go along, we're going to be looking at directional drilling under wetlands and that kind of thing to minimize risk to any of those natural habitats or areas that the pipeline will be going under. So I think we've addressed, we will be addressing a lot of, we've looked at those risks and we've addressed them. So I really am not sure what other risks there might be. You know, I can't talk about contractual risks, you know, in an agreement, because that's not an engineering aspect. So I can't really talk about, you know, those kind of risks in the contract.
Thank you. Mr. Griesbeck, again, I'll request a written analysis, because while I appreciate this impromptu exploration, I thought that we had agreed upon this. I thought that we had come to an understanding that there are things that I can't begin to conceive of, and I have to rely upon you and your designees to explore these things. It's a 19 to, who knows, 20-some $1 million project, and without understanding potential risks, I think we've begun to hear some, and I don't appreciate just hearing them. I would like to read engineering considerations, which may be called risks and or have already been addressed, and I'm confident of that. But how about business risks? I mean, this is a contract, and what are the implications of this on town future plans? I don't feel prepared to approve the contract at this point. So
I appreciate your comments.
Yeah.
Other questions and thoughts by the board?
I have just one. This contract here, it has nothing to do with our contract with Chatham Park. With our, there's 62.5%, and this has nothing to do with that, correct?
That would be part of the contract, correct?
Okay. Right.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, the LGC and the revolving fund will want to see that contract before it's approved. So, approval of this contract isn't really even completely formalized, even with your signature, without LGC's signature on the Chatham Park agreement. So this contract could be approved separate from that agreement.
We will have other discussion regarding that.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. And we have drafts of that agreement. We're looking forward to presenting those to you. Okay.
Well, as I mentioned, I have just the two issues with the contract that I'd like to see us try to resolve this Hanford. The second one being most important, I think, the sewer use ordinance and timing of permitting. That's not to say that it will take that long, because the agencies are working diligently to that has to do with
Mr. Fiocco, if you have some support for your position, I would suggest that in C3 we had a sentence that at the end of that subparagraph that says something to the effect that Sanford's review shall not exceed the time limits of the sewer use ordinance.
Yeah, I'm willing to come at that from a different angle. I just, if was able to add some assurance in this document, then I would like to do that. But I recognize that the sewer use ordinance probably will be the document that most people look to and not think that there's another time limit somewhere in this agreement. And I think it's reasonable that we can reduce that review time and permit time. So, I mean, it's worth, I think, a discussion with Sanford, but I would not, hold that very strongly as a condition for the agreement. The other about the reuse water, I think, is important. I'd like to take advantage of what I see as a real
underscore in that paragraph after the word Pittsboro, I would suggest that we add, or any third party in Chatham County.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think it might require clarification on the fact that any third party who is using Pittsboro's force main.
Okay.
Other than that, I definitely am in support of this. I think it's been proven to be the most cost-effective way to get additional sewer capacity, which we've been talking about for like 15 years. John, I appreciate your concerns about the risks, but I know that there are pump stations and there are force mains all over the country functioning. I know we've got several in town. Our staff were able to manage, keep them operational, without real hazardous conditions or risks being technical risks. So I am ready to move forward and would like more staff to try to get the agreement modified, and I suggested everyone else is in agreement and move forward with this.
I have just one question for the engineer. While you were speaking, I appreciate that information, but you said on the line and the pumps, they're going to be put in to maximum 3 million, right?
Yeah, a peak day of 3 million
So
gallons
not
is
on
allowed by the
regular
IBT rules.
I beg your pardon?
A peak daily flow of 3 million gallons a day is allowed by rules, an average annual of 2 million gallons a day. So if you have a day where you have 3 million gallons one day, you can still pump, but if on a different day, it has to be like made up on a different day where you would pump less.
So if years down the road, we would not possibly be able to use this unit if we got an interbasin transfer of up to 3 million?
Well, the interbasin transfer, you would then, in the application, you would make it for the volume that you need at that time.
So we're at 2 million now, right?
We're at the 2 million now, and then that covers a certain number of years. And then if you want to take the next step and increase that, then you would look at, well, what do we really need now? This other is like a limit it makes you, allows you to do this without going through another regulatory step. But if you want to go above 2, you have to go through a regulatory interbasin transfer step where you apply for this and you get approval through the regulatory process, which usually takes 3 years. So right now you're limited to 2. In the future you might be able to get more if that's the way everybody wants to go. If it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, it does. I guess I was more concerned about maybe the maintenance on pumps down the road if it was all this equipment would handle 3 million gallons a day. That was our peak load all the time. After we get all the permits and all that.
Then you might be going up to 5 million gallons a day or some other number, and then you may have to add another pump or do other things.
Okay.
That, we can only design for what we know right now.
Right. Okay.
And we can design up to 3. We can design these pumps for the pump station to deliver 3, and then
peak time.
And that at a peak day time, and that's it. And then the next step would have to be, the estimates engineers have to look at that again and say, okay, well now you want to go to 5 or you want to go to 6, and your IBT, if you get your IBT transfer in, okay, well now we can go 3 over there. Then you've got to go back and look at what needs to be done engineering-wise at that point.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Further questions from the board?
Make a motion that we approve the agreement with the modified language as Mr. Messick just discussed on not limiting or making the reuse of water credit exclusive to Hillsborough.
You've heard the motion. Michael Fiocco, is there a second?
Discussion.
Discussion?
Well, I guess that would...
We need a second first.
Second.
Seconded by Jay Farrell. Discussion.
So I admit I'm a little bit taken aback, and I would very much appreciate if we implemented a new process whereby we had some prospective view of what might be coming up on future agendas. I think we could have addressed this. I feel confident we could have addressed this. Manager Ruthbeck has assured me that he said that this memo would have written itself. I just have to confess, this is a very large investment. I understand that approving the contract is not approving the investment, but it is a significant step forward. And I have not mentioned that I would very much appreciate seeing a legal review from some entity that has experience with very large interbasin agreements or intergovernmental agreements. OWASA comes to mind. I think that their legal experience would be incredibly helpful to us. I would suggest also that, this is difficult for me to articulate. I don't have any experience with this, but it seems to me that there are some engineering matters which could be called risks or just factors that are engineered, and there's plenty of experience out there for addressing these things. But there may be operational risks. There may be, as I mentioned, business risks that we are exposed to by the nature of this agreement, putting so many of our eggs in a basket of an agreement with another government and relying upon them for a significant amount of our sewer treatment. I have been persuaded that it is a necessary thing. That is not my concern. My concern is that I have expressed a desire to understand risks from an professional analysis perspective. I was told that I would get that. I didn't get that. And I can't support this. I think it's imprudent to move forward at this moment. That's it.
Can I just respond to Commissioner Bonds for a second? I certainly did provide a memo which identified risks and discussed many of the things that we talked about in numerous conversations that we had that addressed a number of subjects. The discussions that, as I understand it, focused on financial risks as well as technical risks. Certainly those financial and those technical risks have been discussed over numerous workshops and meetings and discussions of the PER over the years. And certainly we haven't, I think, neglected any of those issues with anything that we've done previously. And I think what I gave you tonight was, even when I make the comment that the memo is a fairly easy one to write, it's a fairly easy one to write because we talked about it quite a bit, and that was what I think you see reflected in this memo. I also have, obviously, prospective professionals involved that helped us with this analysis in terms of the Wood Company and the Davenport Company, which provide us, I think, with an overview of what some of our risks are. And we've engaged them, I think, extensively and have committed a considerable amount of resources to do that. So, I definitely appreciate your apprehension towards this. As I've mentioned to you and to others, it's one of the most important decisions I think that you guys can make. But to assume that we haven't gone into this decision, and to assume that we haven't, placed any thought or credence to any of those risks that you mentioned before you discuss it this evening, I think is not entirely accurate. I mean, I think what we have
I
here
never
is...
suggested such a thing.
Okay, well, I apologize then, because that's what... but certainly a lot of work has gone into it. If you feel that more work needs to go into it, that's certainly fair. And that's an honest and appreciative answer on my part.
To clarify, are your concerns around, I know the one thing that I know we have somewhat of a long-term plan, but we don't have a concrete short-term long-term plan. Like, this is a temporary fix to solve our immediate needs. But it seems like it's not exactly clear what we're going to do after this. And so maybe, is that where you're concerned? If we put a lot of money into this?
There's a bullet on the risk memo. What if we reach a kind of a bureaucratic inertia, or excuse me, it actually would probably be on the policy side, a governing board inertia or lack of momentum to address phase 2, which
We decided to control wastewater treatment.
we haven't moved on phase 2. Thank you.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But I also understand we do have immediate needs and we have to do something. So that's
And I think if there were this inertia that's mentioned to go to a phase 2, we would be in a similar situation that we find ourselves in now with a limited growth opportunity.
So the question is, if we are investing in this, will we have the resources? If we did decide we wanted to go with the main or large wastewater treatment, will we have the financial resources to do those?
Excellent point.
This does seem like the most immediate solution to the next few years. But it would feel more difficult if we had any years.
Further discussion?
I'll further say that I regret that I was not clear enough with our town manager in apparently requesting the risks, not for the do-nothing scenario, which I think we've already moved past that. And I think that I've communicated that we've moved past that. That I'm understanding we must build a force main to Sanford. There are many, many upsides to it. But I'm sure that there are items that have been addressed by professionals who are far more cognizant of this engineering and business matters. And I would just like to see those items listed and how they were addressed. And I really thought that I was clear about that. And so to see a risk memo that addresses the do-nothing scenario, which is one that I never suggested, is not satisfactory. It seems,
Is there further discussion? If not, we should proceed to vote on the motion made by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Jay Farrell, which was that with the additional information regarding Section E, improvements of future capacity, that the board approves of the wastewater treatment and capacity reservation contract with the town of Sanford.
It's not E1.
C3 and D, second paragraph of D.
C3,
Page 2 and 3.
C3 and D,
And second paragraph of D.
second paragraph of D. Thank you. Is that a correct statement of the motion then? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
opposed.
The motion carries. And we then will proceed to new business next on the agenda. Jeff Jones was going to submit to us appointments regarding planning board membership.
You also have it in your memo as well.
And so the memo includes those persons whose term expires and the one resigned seat. so the floor is open for discussion of planning board appointments.
I'd like a clarification on one. It mentions Wayne Herndon. It says term expires on December 31, 2016. So I'm wondering, should it be expired or should it be expires in 17?
I think it might be, I'm not sure, but I think the one, I think the ones that expired were Carolyn, Rayford, Brian, Bob McConaughey, I believe he resigned as well.
Do you think Wayne and Bob probably had the same term?
I think so. I don't know. I feel like he might not be expired, but if Jeff was
The chairperson of the planning board is here with us. Mr. Bland, would you care to take a stab at an answer? Do you recall whether or not Wayne Herndon's term expires on December 31st, 2016 or in 2017? I hate to put you on the spot, but I might ask you.
You know, I would guess the 2016, since all the others are in that same category. I understand that Bob McConaughey, I understand this via Mr. Jones, who said that Bob has not elected to continue serving. I think that means that he may have stopped before his term was up as an alternate, but for certain he is not going to be reconsidered if that's not the case.
That's what he wrote me.
Does that make sense? That's what. So, I haven't talked to Bob. I used to see him at the post office somewhere, but I haven't had any conversation with him. That's what I'm understanding about him. Obviously I don't see these figures. I don't see these dates, but I think that with what we said about Bob McConaughey, that the others appear to be correct. You know, I don't usually see Wayne Herndon. He usually checks in and says, am I needed tonight? Or, through the office, like Victoria's office. So, that's my best information or speculation that I can muster.
My one thought was that it would be good to know if Mr. Jones has had the opportunity to poll prior applicants whose applications presumably still are on file, as to whether or not they would have an ongoing interest in serving or being considered at this time.
The extent of my knowledge of the situation is he's put it up online. We've received applications from Rayford and Brian to serve again. Carolyn has not, and we haven't received any other applications other than that, so we're going to be short, and I think if y'all could offer up, if y'all had any suggestions, that would be welcome, definitely. If you had anyone that you know of, or any suggestions on how to get people to volunteer.
And the composition is 6 members. Correct, right? 6.
Right.
4 from the town, 2 from the ETJ.
That's correct.
So right now we've got 3 members that are still current: Carl, Beth, and Alfreda. And
Right.
Ray and Brian, both from ETJ, have put in applications. So we need 1 town member and 1 in-town alternate, and depending upon the status of Wayne, 1 ETJ alternate, possibly. If Wayne expires 2017, then we just need 1 regular town member and 1 in-town alternate. I'm supporting both Brian and Ray for the planning board and would make a motion to that effect.
It's been moved by Michael Fiocco and seconded by Pamela Baldwin that Reverend Bland and Brian Taylor's term as ETJ members be re-upped. Are those 2-year positions? How long?
I think there are 3, but I don't. You know?
For the next term, how about that?
Okay.
Is that all we're voting on at this particular point, is the ETJ? That's all we passed out.
Can I be, well, it's Log Barn, it's Shannon in town or out, was Shannon in town or out of town? I can't remember.
Out.
Out.
But he said he was moving to town. But where? I thought about him today. He was a very good member. He was stepping down because he was moving into town and would qualify as an ETJ. That was my recollection. Yes.
Well, perhaps the motion with respect to the ETJ members is all we can accomplish at this particular meeting. Want to assume that? Okay. Then, is there any further discussion of the motion on the floor, which is that Reverend Bland and Brian Taylor's terms be extended for another term? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Motion carries.
We should re-advertise.
I agree.
And I think John makes a very good point. Look through the files to see if we've got some other folks.
I think we need to do more than look further through the files. I think we should
No, in addition.
call them or email and say, are you willing to be reconsidered?
Right, but just look to the files to see who's on file.
Well, and if we know individual persons who might be interested as well, I mean, there is a fair amount of catch-up time from the standpoint of it takes a while to really get conversant with the ordinances. And somebody who comes on today probably really isn't comfortable until 6 months, maybe even a year on board.
Mr. Brissett, perhaps we can put this on the...
I just made that note here, FB.
You can probably, yeah, you can get that for one on board and make it that one piece needs to be...
If you can give me a fancy picture, that would be
All right. That was our first piece of item under new business. Our second piece is strategic planning schedule and facilitation. Brian Gruesbeck.
You have the memo in front of you, and I think they even had this memo included in the last ice storm packet that we had. If you had a chance to read that as well, but essentially, coming up on the time of year when we should be considering and holding retreats and strategic planning. You'll recall that David Long has provided this service for us over the past few years. You also probably recall that, actually trying to get my memo up, but you'll also recall that Mr. Long indicated that he was going to be retiring, or is retired right now, and so as a result, he's probably moved on. I mean, I think he would be interested in assisting the town. He likes us, we like him. However, I don't know if it's, I think he was really looking at that as, well, Pittsboro would kind of be my one remaining project, and I think if we went a different direction, it wouldn't exactly hurt his feelings either. So it's an opportunity for you, I think, to evaluate what you want to do. You can either first go with, go with Mr. Long again, or see if he is even available. He'll be traveling the world right now. I talked to him last when we were at the planning stages, the additional elements process. I think there was some suggestion that we maybe have Mr. Long help us through the some of the additional elements discussion process. At the time, he indicated he was willing to do that. That was a few months ago, and I don't know what he's got going on right now. If you want to select a different firm, we might consider UNC School of Government. I know that the town has used a couple of folks from the School of Government in the past. They probably have someone there that could fit within the schedule. If that's regardless if that's the direction you want to go and who we go with, we still have the other basic considerations. You can see their location. Do we want to do it here? Do we maybe want to do it at the library, conference room, day or evening? We've used different combos there. If we schedule it during the day, the downside is you have to take, some of you may have to take some time off of work or other things that you during your own personal and professional lives, or in the evening. We've used evening there as well. The downside of evening is you don't have as much time to do it, obviously. And so you maybe don't get as many fresh comments as you'd like as you would during the day. And also weekday or weekend, we've used both. One time we met here on a Saturday. We were able to go through from about 8 to 3:30 or 4, I think, with a lunch break in between. And then that begs the last one, length. How much time do you want to spend in one session? I don't think it's very productive to have one session that's, say, less than 2 hours. But at the same time, you really don't want to get into a 10 or 12 hour session. I think, generally speaking, you can get the most done in somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6.5 hours or so with a break in between. So I think probably some of you have given us some thought, but again, it's that time. So if you could just maybe share your thoughts with me, and we can pursue on what you want to do and get that started. I know we use this from a staff perspective. We use this and play a lot, take a lot of your comments into account going into the budget season, which we are just starting right now. So so there's a somewhat of a short-term component, but as you know, budgeting can also be long-term as well. And so we want to start talking about that. And then finally, it's an opportunity, at least in the formats that we've used. It's an opportunity that we've used from a staff perspective to kind of give you guys an idea of what we've been up to, and then what we'd like to, from a staff perspective, working on as well, and get your feedback on that. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of good conversation. You guys have already probably marked down a couple of things you want to discuss when and if it does take place. So at this point in time, just wondering if you could, if you're able to, provide some direction. If you want to handle this offline, you can certainly do that as well.
I support seeing if Long is available or interested. I felt he's done a pretty good job for us several years. Yeah, he did. So I think he's playing guitar and his pros retreat.
Could only ask. Like I said, I don't know.
I favor asking.
We take that all up on the commission is a good backup station.
I didn't feel like we had enough time last time, and the staff report ended up going much longer than we thought. And David Long sat and listened to the staff reports, which I'm sure was somewhat, well, I don't know, I didn't feel it was a particularly good use of his time, but, and I don't know whether the staff responsibilities and agenda changed so much that it would be important for us to hear from him again. But if so, I don't think that we need to have a facilitator here during that portion of it. We do have some topics we've dedicated ourselves to meeting, and maybe it would be good to have, to stick to the visionary part and
Yeah,
not hear so much from staff.
One thing that pops into my mind in that is if you wanted to continue with the staff report and comment, and there's probably some value there. But if you wanted to consider, but I see what you're getting at. If you wanted to stick with having that component as part of a retreat, you might be able to split that up into 2 different sessions. You have one session maybe that isn't necessarily facilitated. I'll just try to do my best to maybe MC it and move it along, and then use a second, say, 3 or 4 hour session or whatever that's actually facilitated where you get into your meatier discussion stuff. Might be one way to go about it.
You're thinking of dedicating an entire session to just the board and goals and objectives?
I think we could stand feedback.
Well, some of them are more talkative than others.
I do value that time with the staff. To me, learning so much about what's going on with them and what they're learning, and I really appreciate having that time with them. But I can see doing it 2 sessions.
Well, if we were to do a day-long session, then there would be perhaps 2 hours of staff presentation and another, 5 to 6 hours vision.
What day would that be on? If I work on weekends.
So we'll either you have to take off work for one day, or several of us do.
And with all of my ideas from severe constraints too.
Monday and Thursday. I'm available Monday and Thursday.
Mondays and Thursdays. Those are fine for me.
I can make it work.
Jerry, do you have a preference?
That'd be fine.
Either one?
You're retired now.
I mean, I'm not.
I think I heard the idea of maybe staff briefings on a separate session or a separate day.
We're not all day meetings, but might start off with that for the first 3 hours. And, Mr. Long or whoever will come in after that. But I think that's a good place to be. That seems really good.
Are we downstage now? I don't have your calendar out.
March? February?
In February, if we can do it. We don't want to do it on the Monday if we have a board meeting that night. We'd be exhausted by the time we got there. So is there a non-board meeting Monday, the 6th, February 6th or 21st?
It's just maybe too soon.
I'm on the 9th.
Yeah, I think, I agree with Commissioner Bottas. I think the 6th might be too soon for us to get our ducks in a row from a staff perspective. The 20th is open as far as I can tell. How many have you gone?
Right.
Approximately what hours per people? 8, 9?
Chatham Park, by the way, has a very nice facility for meetings. It has a kitchen and all of that. And it's been offered for a variety of different sets of meetings. Folks felt that that was a different venue than Chapman's, yeah. They could. Interesting.
So on the 20th?
On the 20th.
Decide on a time and a duration.
8 a.m. until
8 a.m. until we drop.
9?
That is Monday the 20th. And we're going to start with staff. Except for Heather.
Yeah.
And do we want to use the Shannon Park office, or do we want to go somewhere else?
Had a fun feel that day.
That was the second during this meeting about where's I think we do just fine here.
And it is, we don't have a lot of, I mean, it's not like a public meeting. It's just a.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
And,
Yeah, it can be open to the public, it's just, you don't have to have the. That's what time are they talking about, the staff?
Workshop. What time?
Yeah, if I said conference room, that's the.
I think the same thing.
Yeah, I meant that bigger room.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, that's not a great room for holding a meeting that you have to broadcast out to a larger audience.
We've had troubles with
Yeah.
microphones and stuff.
But it has, unlike this room, it has a place where you can sit your food and stuff like that. And it gets you out of the walls a little bit sometimes when you're in these walls. But
Yeah, you got too much of that. So either place is okay with me.
Robert's just, and we'll save John Cox sometime when we've got a big group in. All right, next is update on projects.
Well, you guys covered quite a few of them already in your comments, which I kind of like, actually, because that kind of shares the fun. But I included to you just sort of a brief rundown of a few things. Just real quick on I&I, and I know we talked only just a minute about it earlier tonight, but we've started some repairs and some connections. The slip line construction hasn't started yet. We expect that to be soon. We've got some signage up to kind of help inform the public of what's going on and where the money's coming from and all of that. So hopefully we'll keep working on that, get that under control. As I'm sure you're aware, the Pittsburgh Elementary School sidewalks and NC 7 sidewalks have started. We're still looking at February 14th of a completion. We've got a few, you can tell we've got a few segments out there that are going to need to be completed. There's in particular, the one that always gives me heartburn is there's a guy wire, and I know we share this heartburn probably, but there's a guy wire going out in the middle of where one segment will be that we've been assured will be moved. It's been a part, it was on the plans. Essentially, we're kind of waiting for the utility company to come out and move it. But that is moving along. I won't make any more comments about the legislative breakfast. More traffic circle. I will update you, however, on the NC 87 bridge project because I'm afraid I don't have some tremendously good news on that, but I don't have any specific news either. I'm going to be keeping you and the folks on social media up to date once I receive some more information from DOT. The good news is work on the bridge continues. The bad news is all of the traffic that's been detoured has been going on Old Golston Road, and unfortunately has beaten that road surface up quite a bit. When you combine that with the freeze thaw that we just had, which you guys maybe aren't as familiar with as I am, that really caused, if you want to look around our parking lot, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. That deepened a lot of cracks and fissures in some areas, and when the trucks hit it, it was the end of it. They are going to, DOT is going to have to close that road in the next few days. I'll get back to you with an announcement for that because I asked John Poteet was in conversation with them earlier today and didn't yet get a direct answer from them yet. So by tomorrow we should have an announcement or a statement from DOT so that we're not putting ourselves in the position of giving people, inaccurate information. I want DOT to provide the information and have it right the first time. So once we get that, then we'll shoot that out. But there will be some work on Old Golston Road for a couple of days. They're going to have to work with some other detour, which I haven't found out exactly what that is, that involves closing Old Golston Road. So again, I'm sorry to bear that bad news, but we'll have probably more information on how we're going to deal with it here the next day. We talked a little bit about the Affordable Housing Committee, and Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin spoke a little bit about that. I did include that information in your packet. If you have an opportunity, go through it. There's quite a bit of data in there that I just completely nerded out on during the meeting, and it's really good. I mean, some things that I never would have thought of. Like, for example, there's a dearth. Well, I shouldn't say dearth. You will actually find more expensive rental housing in rural areas, which was kind of interesting to me than in some other areas. But the timelines are all described in there, and I think we're going to. I think Triangle Jam very impressed with how they've actually planned in that planning process. We should get some good information by this summer. And as I said earlier, I would really like to engage them with our conversation on affordable housing for additional housing. So I'd like to maybe talk to them a little bit more and present you guys with some more information on that here in the future.
Agree.
And then just two other things real quick. You have a copy of the bond audit report on your table tonight. Mayor Perry indicated that one of the questions she had was for example, when does the LGC approve the audit? Well, we can say that LGC as of late December 29th, I believe, actually approved that audit. And you have the full report there on your table tonight, so enjoy that. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. And then finally, one more thing with regard to finance. I know Commissioner Bonnet had mentioned in previous meetings the possibility of accepting, increasing our ability to accept different types of payments in different ways. You recall last summer in August we began accepting credit card payments in Town Hall, and I think this past Friday after the new billing receipt started, we set a record for in-town credit card payment or in-building credit card payments. So people are using that a lot more. What we look forward to expanding that part of customer service is offering online payment. And we have some training and testing with our system this week, and if all goes well with our current technology, with current staff, we should be able to accept online payments by the end of this week, mistaken. So that is definitely good news there. Unfortunately, I think Commissioner Bonnet's question specifically dealt with whether or not we could accept card payments over the phone, and that's not, unfortunately, that's something that for security reasons isn't something that anyone encourages as we do a little bit more digging on that. So I think out of protection for the consumer and out of protection for us, it's something we're going to stay away from at this point in time. I mean, if we find other ways of doing it, if we hear other people doing it successfully, then we can certainly take a look at it. After doing a little digging around, we found that seems to be the case with other communities at this point, at least in our experience. With that, I'll tap out. If you guys have any other comments or questions, otherwise I'm so sorry to scare you. One more thing, because I had it written down on the other paper. There is a meeting that I'll be attending on Wednesday that you might hear about that's been actually convened by Chatham County that'll involve some of our emergency response and some of our police, and I think Chatham Park will be there as well. And I think they want to start, the county and Chatham Park want to start a discussion on an emergency facility. And so other than that, I don't know a heck of a lot more, other than this is kind of the start of what could be a larger facility to be located somewhere other than where we have it now. So that's about unfortunately I look forward to reporting that out. Let me get greedy and say one more thing. Potterstone sidewalks. I don't know over the years if you guys have heard about from Powderstone HOA that folks in Powderstone, they want to turn over or transfer control of the sidewalks that are in that development. And that development predates me, probably even predates my predecessor. When the project was constructed, it included sidewalks that were not turned over to the town. The feedback that I've given the manager of the HOA at this point in time, after we've had a little bit of discussion over it here internally with Mr. Messick, is that they're going to first of all ID where the sidewalks are that they're contemplating. They also need to indicate whether or not those sidewalks are within the right of way or whether they are on private property. The sidewalks that are on private property will require a signed and recorded easement. All sidewalks, whether on private property or those that have recorded easements, will have to be inspected by the town. We'll try to resolve any safety issues, or we'll identify safety issues that they will have to resolve. And then once all that's complete, we'll bring it to your attention, and then we can hopefully accept those. And I know that they're eager to do it, so they're working on it right now. So we're in the sidewalk business. I think that's what, it's not a bad business to be in, but it takes a little bit of work. And unfortunately, sidewalks, as you guys are aware, sidewalks that exist in front of built property, in front of improved property, are always the trickiest to manage from a legal perspective. So we'll continue working on that and update you as we can. And I promise, Mayor Perry, that's all I'm going to say.
Well, I will add that I was at Town Hall today when a crying woman came in regarding her water account. And I think we talked about some sort of a revised policy of easing burdens on persons who are, this woman was on a fixed income, and she was, we had to take a box of Kleenex to her because she was so upset at the whole thing. And I was just thinking that it might be lovely to have some suggestions about how other jurisdictions deal with not chronic delinquent accounts, but situations like hers, which I thought Ileana Platten dealt with her absolutely beautifully today, and gave her a lot of reassurance that things were going to be all right. But it was just a really touching situation. I know you all deal with that frequently, but does the board feel like
This is someone that couldn't pay before the pay. I've gotten some of those on Facebook. One person who was not in their account, and she was desperate, she contacted me.
Well, it'd just be nice to know what other jurisdictions do, what humanitarian policies we might be able to replicate.
A lot of places will allow, like, I think Duke Power, for example, if someone can't get it, they work on a payment plan.
Yeah.
But, sometimes people can afford that.
And we try to
And we
do that.
We do our best, but we try to encourage them not, to get caught up and then stay caught up. But on a case-by-case basis, we will try to do things.
I think it's important for us to know, too, what the resources are in the community, because I know there's churches, there are, I think, Salvation Army will pay their bill. But still have that available so people do come and we can get resources.
And our customer service responders help them. There's also the county, and there's different organizations that will pay. And we do have people that we would need to do like that.
Thank you, that'd be great. All right, Commissioner concerns, and next, Jay Farrell.
Just one thing, the holidays was parallel parking, and I will pass that on, but that's in phase 4, no concern right now. The other thing is, Mr. Bruce Beckover on Salisbury Street, corner of Salisbury and Farrell. 3 residents on Farrell Street have not been, their trash has not been picked up several weeks routine. Actually, Sarah Carr told me at the Parks and Recreation that hers hadn't been picked up, sometime weeks on end. And recycling and trash. So if you could
Is there an address or?
well, all the neighbors on that the bed and breakfast on the corner, Don Whitaker, and the funeral home backs up to there, and Sarah Crawford. So put further about that because they said if put it on Salisbury Street, it gets knocked over.
Okay.
There must be some new people on the route because there's been twice, I think, in the last couple of months that one's not been picked up. I don't know, right on Hillsborough Street. You can understand a side street perhaps being missed, but there must be some new people.
Yeah, just feel free to, just tell the constituents and feel free to call the office when that happens and we'll call and we'll take care of that. Yeah, very right.
So I mentioned that Jeff presented to the DVA, and they were really very happy and satisfied with him and what he presented. And one of the comments was he had mentioned that the UDO has now received all the comments, and the planning folks are trying to integrate the comments and address them as best they can into the document, and mentioned that the website of the UDO would be the place for information, and they said, well, how about posting all of the comments that we received? I think it's a great idea, so I would like to urge Clarion to do that. So that
on the UDO website?
Yeah.
I second that.
Yes.
It's a great idea.
The other thing is that the state of North Carolina, Division of Environmental Quality, Public Water Supply, acknowledges that Pittsburgh does not have standard specifications on file with them. So that translates to permittees having to write their own specifications for extending the water system in Pittsburgh. Whereas a lot of jurisdictions have a standard set of specifications and the documents say follow those. So I'd like to urge staff to look into one, getting our specs on file, because we've got them, and somehow getting DEQ to acknowledge that there's standard specifications.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, a point of information, I was made aware of the fact that Pittsburgh Baptist Church is moving to 902. They completed their capital campaign, which was, I understand, originally started in 2008. They've already bought the land, own it, have for some time, and apparently put a cap on the capital for the actual structure, and I think construction will be starting soon. So we'll be losing church at the Pittsburgh Baptist Church sometime soon. I don't know what their ownership decisions are going to be, but that space will be open. I was starting to think about other churches that I know of that are homeless. Might be something others might want to think about as well. And I want to take a moment to offer high praise to Chatham Park investors, to Mr. Rawl, Mr. Smith. Thank you. As my understanding is that the work on the parkway, the land clearing debris was chipped or ground rather than burned. Thank you. And for other reasons, it was brought to my attention the question of open burning. And I recall Commissioner Fiocco speaking on this, and so I went back into the record, and there was a board meeting last year, and I believe you expressed the understanding that we currently have a burn ban in place. Was that what you were saying?
Yeah.
That you weren't? No, we don't. Okay. Well, that's I couldn't find any such policy. I searched the UDO documents, I Googled the town website, and further, my understanding from researching state law is that there's a statewide burn ban for land clearing debris, which is highly and explicitly and detailed qualifications galore. But it exists. It is very qualified, fairly weak. But more importantly, there's a question as to whether or not recent regulatory reform legislation impacts our ability as a local government to in any way limit open burning of land clearing debris. And so I wanted to bring that up and ask if there is interest from fellow commissioners. What I would suggest is that we ask Manager Grisbeck and staff to report our actual current policy as regards this matter, and if indeed we don't have a ban, that Mr. Messick might look into this question of regulatory reform impacts and interpret our options.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this came up, I think, during the burning question that we had over at the Adventist Church, and I'm not picking any Adventist Church, but I think maybe two board members contacted me that night, you guys, and so we looked, and at that time, no, we don't have an explicit burn ban per se. It kind of did surprise me that you can actually apply for that burn permit online through the state. And so when we followed up, actually Chief Crutchfield followed up through Darrell, Chief Griffin. Yeah, they had been aware of it, and there had been a burn permit on file that was obtained through this website process. But we could describe that in a little bit more detail, probably, and see what you guys want to do. I don't know. To be honest, as I see it right now, I don't know exactly what our options are. We can find out.
Very good. DAQ was not able to explain what local government options are, but there's plenty of precedent. The question is whether or not after these regulatory reform laws have gone into place, whether or not local governments still have options. But given the abundant evidence about human health impacts from burning debris, and the fact that we're striving to be a denser community, with the greater density comes greater population numbers, comes greater impacts on human health, and I think that it's a reasonable thing for us to explore. That said, I'll also hasten to add that I myself don't know that we're ready for, say, a backyard leaf ban. Burning on your own property. I don't do it. I don't think we should, but I'm not all that eager to discuss that. But I think very large land clearing projects, that's something we ought not have burning in town.
That's very generous of John Bonnet to say that, because he was at my house the other day, and Mr. Mayor was in the back burning away, and there is some distraction even though he's down. You indicated it was a non-residential issue in your mind, and it was not necessarily a residential issue. And then I got thinking about the sort of the flow of all the smoke going down, settling into downtown, and began to feel really guilty about it. But he got his permit online, and at least he was regulatorily correct, even if he was politically incorrect.
The first gentleman. Yeah.
I noticed that the one up near Andrew Store Road was
that was a problem. And it was flowing onto the road, and obviously that's prohibited in the state law.
Well, I think we're ready in the agenda to ask if there is an interest in going into closed session with respect to NCGS 143-318-11A5 and 143-318A3.
A break. You got to make a motion.
We have to make a motion. Followed by closed session. Made by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Matt Foley.